Welcome to episode 6 of my narrative inquiry, where we are discovering what it means to be Acadian with Lise Pelletier from Maine, USA.
Welcome this evening to Lise Pelletier, and thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me tonight to go over some of these questions in my narrative inquiry and discovering, um, what it means to be Acadian. So I'd like to start off with getting to know you first. And who is Lise?
Well, Lise is, I guess, first of all, a mother of three and grandmother of six. Um, and I've been interested in Acadian literature, first of all, um, for over 30 years. And I came to Acadian history through literature. It shocked me as a 36-year-old New Brunswicker, Francophone New Brunswicker, that I did not know much about Acadians. What I read in Acadian literature was deeply akin to me in that I recognized the values, the strength, the resilience of Acadian people as what I grew up with. And I recognize that Acadian people were my people as well. We had grown up with the same values. And throughout my undergraduate, I did focus on Acadian history and Acadian literature. And then I went on to further studies and explored Acadian literature and l'engagement, that is cultural politics through literature, especially women writers. And what shocked me, I guess, as a 36-year-old was that I had never heard about, the Grand Dérangement. I'd never heard about Acadians to that extent. And I was shocked and angered that in the province of New Brunswick, this was not common knowledge. And it made me wonder why. Of course, as I look today at the province of New Brunswick, we're still dealing with the same perception, or that is negative perception of Anglophones, thinking about Acadians and the fact that history is unfortunately on the side of the victors. It really does not give us the entire picture, everything that happened. It's all really one-sided and one perspective. And so I felt very strongly that if I could, I would work and learn more and disseminate information in any way that I could, and also work at celebrating the culture and the French language. And so that basically is what I have done since I graduated from my first degree, my undergraduate degree. In the last few years, I've been a director of the Acadian Archives at the University of Maine in Fort Kent. So I was a big part of the organization of the Acadian World Congress in 2014, which took place in northern Maine and twin regions of New Brunswick, northwestern New Brunswick, and the county of Témiscouata in Quebec. So it was the biggest event of our lifetime, I believe, and one that rekindled Acadian pride that I saw firsthand. I'm living in Fort Kent, Maine, and I'm living in northern Maine in the area of the Upper St. John Valley, directly on the St. John River across from northwestern New Brunswick, where I think we're 85 to 90% French Canadian, either Acadian or Quebecois. And um, it's fascinating. I know that it really surprises a lot of people from France and other and areas of Canada to find out that there are actually Acadians in Maine and that they still speak French. Um, so my understanding of people calling themselves Acadians, at first I really didn't understand. I thought they meant they were French. Because often they would say, well, I'm French Canadian because my mother's from Canada. Or so it kind of, the word Acadian was kind of synonymous with either French speaking or genealogically linked to French Canada. And I accepted it like that, until I found a family um, whose ancestor came to the Madawaska area, that is the county or the territory of Madawaska, which encompassed both northwestern New Brunswick and the northern area of Maine before 1842. And I found out that their ancestor was on a ship ready to be deported with her family, and along with about 240 people. And they were prisoners aboard a British ship, and they were all Acadians. And the Acadians overtook the sailors or the crew on the ship, and they sailed the ship to the mouth of the St. John River. It was the Pembroke. So the ancestor I'm talking about was 8 years old in 1755. So she and the rest of the prisoners walked to Quebec, where they sought refuge during the years of Le Grand Dérangement. And afterwards, she moved to the area of Saint-Anne-des-Pays-Bas, in the area of today's Fredericton, where she married a Cyr, a C-Y-R, a big family, and a number of the men in that family came to the Madawaska territory in 1785. And so she came and she knew her history. She had been a prisoner. She knew about the Grand Dérangement. She also knew contemporaries who were victims. And I mean, she survived. She was a refugee. So there were thousands who did not survive. And she knew that history. And when she talked about herself and her family, she said, I'm Acadian. And so when the people from the Madawaska area would tell me 30 years ago that they were Acadian, that's what they meant. And that is incredible. I mean, that's a direct line to an event that is still is both traumatizing and in a way coalescing a people. And when I teach about either Acadian literature or some snippets of Acadian history, I don't talk about Acadians being survivors of a genocide, um, because they are so resilient. And it's not just surviving, and it's not just about resilience. It's a faith in life that I have seen, that I grew up with, and that I have seen firsthand, which is a lot more than saying, for example, as compared to, well, what do you want? You know, I was born to have a very poor subsistence, and or very poor. That's not who we are. Um, you know, we just say, well, there's something better ahead, and you know, we just plow through. In fact, that one of the ways that Acadians demonstrated that that mind frame was when they settled in the Madawaska territory. There was nothing here except there was a small Maliseet village of about 300 people. And so the Acadians who came to the area, some of them were merchants, and they had established business collaborations with merchants in southern New Brunswick, and they continued doing that. And they also did business with merchants in Rivière-du-Loup or Quebec. They were on what was essentially the highway between Halifax and Montreal. It was well known for that distinction, and they had no qualms about doing business with either Americans or English Canadians, because it was, you know, it meant a good business. It meant a way to survive. So they were very pragmatic in that sense. That's a long introduction, huh?
No, it's good. I like to have a background. Not everyone wants to share, but when I get someone that does enjoy sharing, that's why I always schedule. I've had interviews be as fast as 30 minutes.
Okay.
And I mean, they answered the questions, but it's a narrative inquiry, so I want to hear you give me a narrative, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
important for you to, you know, talk as much as you want to. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So the first question that kind of sparked all of this narrative inquiry was, over the summer, my professor wanted me to think of a question that was meaningful to me. And it's a question that I've been asking myself, I think, for a long time. And it's, what does it mean to be Acadian?
So you're asking me,
Yeah.
what does it mean for me to be Acadian? I have to say that for me, it's grounded in history, also in family, because of the Thibodeau line. My father was a Pelletier, but his grandmother was a Thibodeau, and so from the Thibodeaus, like, we go way back to the 1630s in Acadie. And so, you know, that history is worth learning about, not just from an individual's point of view, and genealogy, but of course um, how the Acadian history is part of the history of Canada, and part of the Franco history of Canada. What I know about being Acadian means very strong values in terms of work ethics, and belief in life. Belief in life that is stronger than death, even life that is stronger than genocide. Resilience. It means to be proud of our French language and to defend it. It does need defending. I think of the province of New Brunswick. Still today, after more than 30 years of the province being officially bilingual, it is hard to state, we cannot state that the French language is on an equal footing with the English language. And in some ways, I blame Francophones for always bending, always trying to be respectful, and to their detriment. And I've seen that happen here as well, where the majority speak French, but in a room of 200 people, if one person does not understand French, then the entire group will revert to English. You would never see that in a group of Anglophones with one French speaker. You would never see them revert to French. So there's an element of the activist in me that I ascribe to being Acadian. I mean, I'm proud of being Acadian, and so I will defend being Acadian and being French. And I've had to do it. 2 weeks ago, I went to the Tim Hortons in Edmundston, and Edmundston is like 99.9% Franco, okay? So the server was unilingual English, and she did not understand French either. But she did understand when I said, you need to get me somebody who speaks French, because I will not speak English. I mean, everybody around was speaking French. And I thought, I've done this my entire life. I have, accommodated because, the other people don't speak two languages. And I said, that's how come we're not more advanced in our pursuit of having the same legal services in hospitals, in restaurants, in well, what are they called? The liquor stores. Anywhere that is, even governmental offices, which by law have to be both English and French. You have to be able to get, that is the law, to get services in the language of your choice. And that does not exist in New Brunswick. It does not.
Yeah.
And it's a political will. It's a political will. And it is to our detriment. I do blame politicians and administrators, political leaders, who didn't want to do what was required for French to have the same platform as English. But it's been going on for 50 years. And I see some politicians just really digging their heels in and absolutely refusing even to admit to the existence of a problem. It is a huge problem. Um, and, I mean, if we just keep accommodating, it will never get better. So that's a part of, for me, if when I embrace being Acadian, it's that is a part of me as well. Uh, that part that wants to be actively engaged in my culture.
Yeah, and when you're talking about the active offer of hello, bonjour, and all of our government facilities across New Brunswick, I know it's quite a joke because I worked admin support um, myself for Horizon Health for 5 years,
Yeah,
and I was in a bilingual position, but those around me, I've had people refuse to service. They give the active offer. I hear them give the active offer. The patient responds in French. They respond back to the patient in English,
yeah,
and they're being paid to be in a bilingual position.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And this person's
Right.
actually now in politics, which kind of just perpetuates what you said about politicians.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, this was 6 years ago that I saw this happen at the Miramichi Hospital, and it was very frustrating
Yeah.
to see.
Yeah.
I worked in 3 different health zones across the province, and I had to do bilingual um, translations for
Right.
different
Right.
departments because they didn't have anyone there, and I'd have to go
Yeah.
down and I had to explain to a woman that she might lose her baby.
Oh
Like,
my God.
so, like, that shouldn't be me
No,
as
no.
admin support doing that,
Yeah.
right? There should be nurses that are able to
Right.
speak French to the
Right.
patients. Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, 100%. It's frustrating when you go into different places, and like I already know it's easier for me to get the job done if I just do it in English.
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
just gonna go with
Yeah.
that as my language of business, you
Yeah.
know? And the few times where I did decide to, go with French, the service is, it's not necessarily the same. So
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
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 So my next question is all of that what you just described different than what you would have thought about as would have thought in your childhood?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think what I remember from, um, well, first of all, I did not grow up uh, hearing the words Acadia and Acadians. And I think, what I remember from history lessons, and that would have been social studies, I imagine, in fourth, fifth grade, maybe sixth grade. Um, and maybe there was a talk of Acadians and the deportation. I might have thought that people were going on a picnic somewhere. They were all going on boats, and that was it. And it's like, okay, there. And I was left with the impression that there might have been Acadians as people who lived in New Brunswick at some point but no longer existed. That was my impression. And then, of course, late 60s, 70s, I was made aware of the existence of Acadians, especially with the founding of the Université de Moncton, which is really ironic. Um, and then Mayor Jones in Moncton. I remember that. I remember the pig heads, and I remember that whole incident because it made national news. Um, we were very much into my family listening to the news. Uh, in fact, we discussed that quite a bit, and but there was not a profound understanding of what was at stake, and the context of Acadian people and Acadian history at that time. There was, a lot of talk about French, um, but it was not necessarily linked to the history and the mistreatment of people who were of Francophone origins in the province, and why that needed to change. And so the word Acadian was also connected to the Acadian Party in the 1970s. I can't remember the year, but and they were seen as that party was seen as almost militant, and proposing a split of the province, kind of diagonally, so that the francophone regions would be annexed to Quebec, and the anglophone regions and like the bottom could be annexed to Maine, or could be their own province. And that was proposed by the Parti Acadien. And so I think that that use of the word Acadian brought about quite negative reactions, because they were proposing to split a province. And instead of, they were just proposing to like take off, instead of trying to fix the problem. And so I know that in a lot of people's minds that was just wrong, and actually they were, they were skirting the issue, the real issue, and a lot of people did not understand. It was kind of tongue in cheek, this whole split of the province. um but I think it unfortunately did not have the desired effect. It kind of fell flat, and after some weeks and months it just fizzled out. I think it was a brave attempt, um but anyway, so that was my understanding really of um what Acadie and Acadian was, until I went to college, and I was 36 years old when I started. And so it was quite a wake up, um, experience for me. Mm.
So my next question is, are English Acadians less Acadian due to assimilation?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I guess, you know what, I really believe that um, you have to answer that on your own, right? I mean, you can't lump everybody or generalize and say, well, people who've been either assimilated or they might be English speaking, but they might embrace traditions and cultures and beliefs that are all profoundly Acadian. And so, in that respect, the same thing with Franco Americans. A couple of decades ago, when you talked about Franco Americans, the first thing they would cite as an element of the identity was the French language. That is not true today, and yet they embrace the Franco-American identity in spite of the fact that they do not speak French. to me, it's a big element. It's a huge element. French is my native tongue, and um, and I love it. Um, it's not that I have anything against English. It's just that French is part of me, and so I think it's really important in terms of being an Acadian and um, being Franco, and you know, being Acadian without being Franco. It really depends on the individual. Um, some say they're Acadian because they have a genealogical link. That is, they have a family name, and that's where it starts and ends. And whether they speak English or French, I don't think has much influence, on that sense of belonging. Mine definitely goes beyond that. Um, and my identity has a lot to do with the French language and being Acadian. Yeah, it does. For me, it does. But I do recognize, I respect that, certain Acadians and Franco-Americans without speaking French are deeply connected to the Acadian culture and sense of belonging. Mm.
Definitely. Um, so would you say that you've had fewer opportunities as an Acadian?
No, but that's interesting too, because I would say that being a woman and being an Acadian woman are definitely detrimental in the realms where I worked. Because I was in a university setting, but administratively, um, very much still a men's world out there. And I know that, so being an Acadian on an American campus, um, yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting that some people perceived me as having an agenda, and I had to laugh. Here I am, director of the Acadian Archives. You think I don't have an agenda? That's my mission, right? Is to promote, celebrate, but also raise awareness. Um, so yeah, in a lot of ways, and I heard it. I heard it from being elsewhere in the state and being elsewhere in New Brunswick, in English speaking areas where I saw somebody um, scold a child for doing something, and he said, "That's stupid. What are you, French?" And that wasn't such a long time ago. And, I realized you don't hear that much in the St. John Valley, because you're not going to say it out loud, because there's bound to be French speaking people around. You're going to be insulting a big bunch of people, you know? So you wouldn't say anything here. But I also know that um, some people had to change their names to get a job, or, that wasn't the case with me. Um, but yeah, who knows? There's always I guess always um, the kind of what is not said, like behind closed doors, how people appear to you, and politically, that was certainly would not be very wise to say something that would sound very racist. You know, they would not say it out loud, or they'd say it in confidential tones to, you know, one or two people. They wouldn't say it in public, and they would certainly would not say it in front of me. Um, so yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Mm.
So, do you feel that you had any barriers due to language?
Personally, no. In fact, when I studied my master's and doctoral program, um, I was in an advantageous situation because I was studying in French and studying about Canadian content, let's say. I benefited from a Canadian American scholarship. So in that sense, the French language and Acadian content of my studies really, really helped me. And I did not feel that, I did not feel any disadvantage at the university when I was studying anyway. Having a job on a university campus, though, is different. Um, and also, it really depends. At the University of Maine in Fort Kent, for example, where I worked, so most of the teachers are from the outside. So we have, like, in this area, we have three major institutions, or you know, big employers. So we have Fraser Paper Mill, we have the hospital in Fort Kent, and we have the University of Maine, and then the school system. So those three, the bigger employers, like Fraser Paper Mill, their administrators are mostly Anglophones, English speaking Americans, Canadians. Hospital as well, and University of Maine Fort Kent. Yeah, English speaking professors. So what happens is, they come to this area. Everywhere else, their world is completely English. They come to this area where the majority, the majority of the population is French, has a totally different cultural background. Um, a background that goes back 400 years. I mean, when I think about my Acadian ancestors, they were here in the 1600s, and I know some were here, the is 1604, and I can trace my ancestors back to that. So I imagine that it has to be quite intimidating for some people to not know French at all, not speak French, not be of the culture, and kind of be wary, kind of be intimidated by the potential for power, the potential threat, you know? Um, we experienced that as Franco Americans at the turn of the century in Maine. Um, and in fact, what happened was there was massive immigration of French Canadians from Quebec and Acadia to the New England states. In Maine, 1 million French Canadians, flooded the industrial towns. They were Catholic, they were French speaking. They kept up with their traditions, their religion, their language. They even had certain sections of towns that were little Canadas. And, the Protestant led governments, either politics, industries, were very, very afraid that this, like French speaking mass, because that was a lot of people, could basically upset the authority if they decided, for example, that they were going to boycott the industry, or they were going to strike. They could have crippled the industries. They could have voted out people, you know, uh, either Protestant or who were different, and that was a threat to them. And so, in the early 1920s, Maine invited KKK to Maine, and the membership in Maine grew to become the biggest in the nation. So tiny Maine, that is almost 100% white, became the place where the KKK thrived. In fact, their first daylight parade was in Milo, Maine. Of the KKK throughout the nation, the first daylight parade was in Milo, Maine. And in 1919, the state adopted a law, an anti-French law. That is, it wasn't phrased that way. It was made into law, the fact that teachers could not use French as a method of training their students. French was seen as a foreign language and could only be used in that context. And so what happened immediately after was it was made known that if schools refused to obey this law, then they could be refused state funding. So, that was really well known. And, superintendents or inspectors sent out letters, stating this. And so what happened is teachers started telling their students that they could not speak French in school. And then it bled out into the playground. And in order to maintain a really tight rein on that, they started telling kids that, well, the French they were speaking was inferior anyway. It didn't sound like French from France. It was just unrefined, and it was inferior. And the language of the world was English, so they had to learn English. And when this went on, so from 1919 well into the 1990s. So the law itself was changed. It wasn't destroyed, or I don't know how you say it, but condemned. It was transformed into a bilingual law, meaning that you could use two languages to teach in order to get a population that did not speak English, for example. So, but it was not like the first law was rescinded or condemned. But I taught kids who had been through the elementary school in Fort Kent, and whose teachers told them not to speak French. They couldn't understand it, so they did not want them speaking French. Yeah. So so it's that type of prejudice goes so far back and is so ingrained in the minds of people that it pervades. There's an element of that. In fact, so I've been living in Fort Kent and working here for 30 years. And there are still, and I speak French all over the valley. There are still people that I meet who speak French to me and say, yeah, but I don't speak the correct French. You know, my French is not good. They they speak like me. And, you know, they denigrate themselves because that's what they believe, that's what their parents were told. And a lot of parents stop teaching their kids French or encouraging French at home because of that, because they were ridiculed, because they were punished. Some were physically punished. And, you know, a lot of them were traumatized. So, yeah, when when you wound somebody at that level, you know, because when you're a kid and you're learning to express yourself, usually you have one language. And if that's taken away from you, you know, who are you? How do you express yourself? And how do you make peace with the fact that this is the only tool you have and it's inferior somehow?
Yeah, it's definitely hard on a child's mental health to feel
Yeah,
less than.
yeah, yeah.
So what has been your biggest challenge as an Acadian?
Um, in the St. John Valley, I think there are, unfortunately, there is profound lack of confidence. Um, you know, this uh, idea that the language is inferior translates to, well, I'm inferior, and um, really gets in the way of progress. You know, I really believe that if people want to make a change, let's say for whatever reason, it's all political, right? It's all political. Everything in life is political. But I believe that people can make changes and they can implement changes if they want to, if they're well organized and you know, consistently work towards a goal. And what I find is, you know, a coalescing is hard. You know, I've worked as the president of the Maine Acadian Heritage Council, and I've worked with Le Club Français, and I've taught French at different levels. And I find that there's a kind of and it's not even admitted. Um, you know, people don't talk about it. I think they don't necessarily realize that um, they really lack confidence. They, you know, they lack confidence in you know, taking steps forward, being brave about maybe being out of their comfort zone, you know, which is what is needed if you want to make changes. Often it's, you know, not necessarily what's most popular, or but yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Yeah. And they're, you know, sometimes self-defeatist, you know, oh, well, it's not, it's, you know, it's pointless. Why even make the effort? Because, you know, we'll never get more money, you know, well, let's apply for a grant. Oh, no, 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 you know, it's always the same people for get the grants and, you know, so yeah, I think that's, to me, that's hard. And yet, you know, I look around, it's the most loving, generous community. If you're in a scrape, my goodness, you know, people you don't even know will come and feed you. We had a flood here, and people were dropping off food plates and pizzas while we were cleaning up and, you know, sheltering. I mean, one of our friends, you know, was somebody we knew. We had flooded, and he just took out his phone and called his wife and said, so Dave and Lise are going to be staying with us for 3, 4 days. You know, they need to get their house cleaned and the water out, and that was it. That was it. In the town of, you know, 1,600 people had to be evacuated. Nobody went to a shelter. So you have people who will go like all out, generous beyond their means, you know, and sense of community, but are really have, you know, are afraid to venture out of what's known to them. I don't know. Maybe they're afraid um, of failing. They're afraid of being told that they shouldn't do that. I don't know. It's disconcerting. It's really disconcerting. The only analogy is, you know, like business people. Like you, business people would not talk politics because it's bad for business. They might have really negative repercussions from their involvement, let's say, something like that. You know, it's kind of that feeling that, oh, I shouldn't be doing this because, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me tonight. I really,
Oh, you're very welcome.
yeah, it means a lot to me. I'll reach out to you in the next couple of weeks. I have a survey that I'm sending out, just collecting some demographic information from the participants. So I'll be sending that out
Okay.
probably in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
And I'll keep you updated
Yeah.
on the rest of the project.
I would love to hear the results of your research.
Yeah, it's going to be ongoing for some time yet because I
That's
still have
fine.
a few participants and I'm trying to not overwhelm my family either because I'm only doing this at night outside of my full-time job. So
Yeah.
trying to do maybe 1 to 2 interviews a week,
Yeah.
no more than that. I'm
Yeah.
also teaching French in the evenings, so yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Full
always a lot
plate.
going on. So,
Yeah.
but I'll stay in touch.
All right. Thank you so much. It's nice to meet you. Good
We
luck.
too. Thank you.
Oui, bonne chance.
And bye.
Bye.